Here we are, episode number 1 of Ugly Duckling and the Bright Orange Future, the Ugly Duckling podcast. I'd like to introduce all of you to my real life brother, Matt Garrity.
Hello, everybody. How's it going?
Coming to us from Seattle, Washington.
Indeed.
And it is, let's see, it's about 5 o'clock in the afternoon Pacific time on July 2nd, a nice Thursday, as we record this very first real episode that we'll share with the world. And I just couldn't be more thrilled to be undertaking this. We're going to do at least 8 episodes to see how this thing goes. So we're committing to the month of July, 2 episodes a week, and we're going to do this and get 8 in the can and see how this thing runs. You down for that?
Straight up. Yeah, let's do it. Let's do an 8 episode run and see where we're at.
8 episode run, and that'll be, that's 8% of the 100 that we're going to do over the next year. And
that's right. I think we're going to be an unstoppable force of video podcasting, and I think once we get a taste for it, we're going to be unstoppable. We're not going to want to stop.
Listen, I've always wanted to just hitch my wagon to your star in some way. So
let's do it.
Let's figure it out. This is kind of like company time and resources. So I've been told by Swan Bitcoin that I'm supposed to do reader ads at the beginning of this. So this is a sponsored podcast.
I like that.
Swan Bitcoin is a company that I started with some friends like Jan Pritzker, the author of Inventing Bitcoin, and a longtime tech guy, and some other just good friends, podcasters, and authors in the Bitcoin space, and some good designers and coders and stuff like that. And we basically just tried to create the absolute easiest way to get into Bitcoin the right way. So it's recurring purchases. You sign up. It's like a membership. You just get a plan and automatic withdrawal from your bank account, automatic purchase of Bitcoin, automatic withdrawal to self-custody, which is a big deal in Bitcoin. If you want it, if you're not quite ready for that, we'll store it for you. No big deal. That's free. And we have by far the lowest fees in the United States for doing Bitcoin that way. So it's kind of like a really easy Bitcoin savings account. You make the decision once, and it just kind of keeps stacking your Bitcoin stash, just like you would making contributions into a 401k or something like that. So swanbitcoin.com, check it out. And this podcast is not a Bitcoin podcast. That's what I pitched you on, and
that's right.
I'd love to just talk with you a little bit about why we think this is kind of important. I see you as kind of like a representative of all of those people that are Bitcoin curious and have some questions about Bitcoin. And we're going to take people on a little bit of a Bitcoin journey and bring Matty G into the bright orange future, and translate some of these things for people and talk to some interesting guests and really talk about the milieu from which Bitcoin has sprung.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like Bitcoin curious. That's a good way to put it. That's actually really spot on.
Yeah. It's kind of a thing. I'm not the first person to say bit curious.
Yeah. But that really, I think that describes a whole lot of us that are like me, and a lot of the friends I've been talking to recently, just as I've been kind of putting my attention and my mind on the world of Bitcoin a lot more than I had been since we've been kind of picking up this conversation. And I find it accurate. I find that there's a range of people who are kind of like, they've heard of it and they have a little bit of excitement for it. And they're like, oh yeah, I should really buy some, but I don't really know how,
right.
I should have done it 2 years ago, whatever,
2 years ago, 8 years ago,
to the
5
real,
years ago.
Yeah, right.
But, so listen, let's get into, what we were talking about doing with this is, we really want to talk about some of the aspects of culture and history and music and sports and things sort of affected by Bitcoin and that sort of affected Bitcoin as it has arisen, sort of from what we think is probably kind of like a little bit of a GenX cultural moment. We've talked a little bit about what a special moment it was in the early 90s after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War. immediately jumping into like some very, very serious things in the culture with a little bit of a recession and the Gulf War. And then, the grunge movement arising up in Seattle where we were, and just how interesting a time it was to be alive there, and just how earnest that brief moment in time was. And now in 2020, it feels like so many people are being, sort of pulled out of the matrix and into real life, because this sort of papered over experience that a lot of us have had, with little blips with the dot-com bust and, the global financial crisis, but then another 12 years or whatever of the longest bull market in history, that just, so much of what we're looking at doesn't feel real. And it feels like we're seeing cracks in the seams with the pandemic and all sort of social and cultural strife. And, what are we going to head into? The first thing I think is going to happen is I think we're going to see a lot of earnest culture over the next 4 or 5 years, and people believing in causes, Bitcoin being one, Black Lives Matter being one, Trump being one for people that are into that, like whatever it is, it seems like we're getting serious again for the first time in a long time.
Yeah. And I wonder if that also helps sow the seeds for movements that are both positive and negative. It's kind of like in the late 60s when Vietnam War protest was at its height and the cultural shift was going on in a big way, and equal rights was a big deal. And there was all this chaos for the first time in this country, like that, this culture wars. And there was all of this, out of that came a whole bunch of gurus, a whole bunch of spiritual movements, in that time. And that's really interesting to me.
Yoga and health food and free love.
Health food, free love, but also like very serious spiritual searches, searching for something else because, what you've been brought up with, you start to feel an emptiness, or what you've been told isn't true, or those kind of things.
That feels very much like the moment we're in now, right? Like
that's what I'm saying.
You and I are both Gen X, and we're watching this generational war essentially between the boomers and their millennial children, where the boomers have taken all the money and they've borrowed from the future. And, the average boomer is getting $400,000 more out of Social Security than they put in. And the average millennial is going to put $750,000 or whatever more in than they get out. Or I think that's off. I think the total delta, I think it's like 300 in and 400 out or something. But the delta is basically the average millennial is giving like $750,000 to the average boomer.
Wow.
Yeah. So like that alone, and that's just Social Security, let alone the pumping up of the asset prices and the fact that, the average boomer at age 35, when boomers averaged age 35, they had 21% of the wealth in the United States, and millennials average age 35 have 3%. So they're, at 1/7 of the generational wealth of the boomers at the same age. So the boomers have basically like rigged the system, not through any fault of like any one individual. It's just like a big voting bloc voted themselves all the money and stole from the future and put it into their assets. Right. So yeah, so that's also not going to stand, and some shit's going to break now.
I just thought of too, it wasn't at 71 when we went off the gold standard.
Now you're talking Bitcoin. Yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, I'm just curious because that was also.
That's exactly right.
I was born in 1970.
Yep.
So I had 1 year of the gold standard. Yeah. Basically.
That's exactly.
But then
right.
I was also, more or less, I was born to, very young parents who, dropped out of college, started taking acid. They were straight A students and totally, regular Americans from Wisconsin or whatever, moving around. But when they finally dropped out of college, they were in Wisconsin. But after 70, so 70, 71, got the gold. I mean, there was just so much crisis during that time,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and so much upheaval, I guess. And being born into that is very interesting. So you were born in 77. I was born in 70. Both born in the 70s. 1980 is Ronald Reagan coming into the mix. And I know that, and then that was part of the big deregulation movement in terms of a lot of the financial institutions and a lot of industry in general.
Yep.
And I wonder how that, you know, I'm just thinking of decade by decade, how you lead up, you know, like it's a small amount of time in the grand scheme of things, you know, just our lifetime. Here I am almost nearing 50 years old, which sounds really old to me. Oh my gosh, to say that out loud. But it's just been these, I guess I've lived long enough now to see two periods that have similarities and are very different, you know, the current one and kind of when I was born, you know, it's like, it's a weird 50-year span.
Yeah. I mean, it is, I think, I mean, I was just a child in the 80s, but I've certainly made a study of that decade over the years and had good lenses into it, you know, being around you who did, you know, you at least were a teenager and a young adult in the 80s. And, you know, there's been a lot of just sort of money sloshing around in the last, you know, especially 5 or 6 years, the last half of this decade, where we, you know, just kept printing money and didn't crash. There probably should have been a correction in 2014 and probably another one in 2018. And they just didn't take because we just printed our way out of it. But, you know, the 80s weren't all just go. There was a lot of cultural strife then too, and a lot of angst, and it was still the Cold War and all this uncertainty and all these different things.
It was definitely, yeah.
So I think that kind of mirrors it a little bit, and that dovetails nicely with thinking about, okay, is 2020 kind of like, you know, 1990 or 1991, and are we heading into that sort of, you know, that earnest stage?
Grunge coming back.
Yeah. So listen, I know you. I asked you to listen to a Bitcoin podcast.
Yes.
I think you listened to Daniel Prince from One's Bitten interviewing Friar Hass McCook.
Yes.
You know, with fresh ears as a bit curious person, I'm so interested to hear what you liked about it and what kind of stuck out as like, that needs a little more clarification.
Yeah. What I liked about it was the practical approach and the honest story that Mr. Hass tells. This is like, I kind of appreciate that somebody who's really felt the pain of his belief, you know, in terms of his own story and gone through some really tough times in terms of his investing in Bitcoin and being a Bitcoin evangelist. And I kind of realized like, oh, this isn't just like easy street, you know, it's not just put the pedal to the metal and go. Like there's this is a sea change. This is a lot to take in. I think, so dollar cash average, DCA.
Dollar cost averaging.
Yeah. That was something that I hadn't really thought about, or if I had, I hadn't remembered.
Yeah. I'll pause and just put a little color on that. I think the reason that it's actually what I kind of read out in the ad at the beginning. It's really just Americans in particular are notoriously bad at saving up for anything because we've just had such easy credit compared to anyone else around the world. The whole system is basically, the whole global system is created to lend money to Americans and American companies. So we don't really have to think about saving up for anything. So we're terrible at saving because we've never had a reason to. So basically the only things that we're any good at saving into are a 401k where it's automatically taken out of your paycheck, or a mortgage, which is really why like that's been the vehicle for savings and wealth building for Americans for, you know, a generation or two already. So yeah, that thought of like setting up something that you decide to do once and then it's just automatically taken out of your bank account and you just set it and forget it. That's really what it's about. It's automatic dollar cost averaging. And the automatic's really important because you can do DCA as a strategy, but if you don't have it set automatically, then you're going to break down and not do it, because you're going to go onto the exchange and try to, buy a dip, or not going to want to buy if you think it's high, but then it goes up higher the next week, and then you end up, doubling your buy, but you bought it high, now it goes down. And anyway, you just mess up basically, and you lose money.
Yeah. So dollar cost averaging is a concept that you can use by doing a regular purchase of X, of whatever.
Yeah, you could do it for whatever, but DCA for Bitcoin is,
and that just means
that
that you're averaging out the cost of over a long period of time of what you're purchasing, and and you have to, and I guess the other aspect is you do it consistently. Every
and
set amount of time.
when you fix the amount, by definition, you buy a little bit more when the price is low, and you buy a little bit less when the price is higher,
right?
On a relative basis, because your contribution amount in US dollars is fixed.
I did have a question while I was listening to that. I had a lot of thoughts come up in my head. One was this idea of Bitcoin being, and I guess maybe there is an easy answer to this, but I'll ask the question anyway. It's still talked about in relationship to like how much it's worth in US dollars, at least here in America. Maybe it's different everywhere. And I just wonder what if Bitcoin, is it supposed to replace the dollar?
So maybe, or we'll see. And so what you're talking about in monetary theory is called a unit of account, which is what money are things priced in. So you could say like a cow is worth 1,000 apples, or it's worth $300 or whatever, like the unit of account. The commonly used unit of account is what, eventually, Bitcoin may become. We don't price things in gold either, but gold is a money. Gold is used as a store of value. It's not a very good medium of exchange. But that's really how you have to think about it. So, the progression of a monetary asset on its path toward being global money, it starts out as speculative investment, basically, or a collectible, let's say. And that's kind of where Bitcoin was for the first few years. And it's in still the early stages, or maybe the middle stages, of being a store of value as it kind of goes up the curve. And that means it's something that you may choose to store value in for a long period of time. You've chosen to start storing some value in Bitcoin, whatever percentage of your net worth, a couple percent or whatever. I'm storing, I have more conviction being in it every day, all day for 3 years now. And so, I and my family and AJ are, we're storing more of our net worth in the Bitcoin protocol. Over time, I do occasionally send Bitcoin. I sent some Bitcoin to somebody today for some services that they performed for the company. I've taken investment into the company that people have sent Bitcoin instead of wiring cash. And there are lots. I earned $2 worth of Bitcoin today for doing some little tiny thing for a product that Bitcoin Magazine launched. So it is already a medium of exchange. So they don't. It's not clean. It's not like, okay, you're done being a store of value. Now you move into medium of exchange, and then eventually you get to unit of account. It's already today a unit of account in some circumstances, like crypto trading. And it's already a medium of exchange for some people. Some people heavily use it because they have a ton of Bitcoin from 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, and they don't have much cash. So they're trying to find places to spend Bitcoin. But for most people globally right now, the primary use case of Bitcoin is as a store of value, and really like a speculative store of value. It's us taking a bet and saying like, hey, Bitcoin at 9,000 seems like a good bet. I'm going to store some value in that, and I think it's going to go way up. But I think, eventually, I do believe that Bitcoin will be a unit of account. And I think, by 2030 or 2035, I think most goods and services around the world, you'll be able to price goods and services. You'll be able to get a price in Bitcoin and in the local currency, wherever you are.
Cool.
It'll take a little bit.
Yeah, that clarifies my thoughts on that. I was also listening to him and thinking about his, it was, I don't understand a lot about the mining of blocks and what that exactly means.
Mm-hmm.
I could try to describe it to you and you could tell me like, whoa, that's not right. But he was talking about how there's only a certain amount of Bitcoins left to mine, but the only way you can mine a Bitcoin is if somebody's trying to make a transaction on the blockchain, or you mine, you facilitate the transaction. Well, that's part of the mining process, and if you do enough of those, then you've.
Here's the deal. You're solving for a hash every 10 minutes. So all the computers on the network are cranking away, and all these mining farms are cranking away trying to solve this math problem every 10 minutes. As soon as the solution is come up with, then the block is mined, and you move on and start solving the next problem. So those Bitcoins are created, on average every 10 minutes. It sometimes can be sometimes there's 3 or 4 blocks mined in a 10-minute period, and sometimes it goes like an hour and 20 minutes or an hour and a half or whatever before the next block is mined.
Can you observe that?
You can observe it all real time. There's all kinds of block
cool.
explorers and kind of
oh, wow.
Sites where you can watch it happen and get alerts when the next block is mined and things like that. And with each block here, basically what a block is you're adding the transactions that people wanted to be included in that block. So that's where the transactions and the mining is related. And sometimes the blocks are full, in which case you're going to start paying more to get your transaction included in the block. And sometimes if I wanted to send you some Bitcoin, I would include an instruction of how much I want to pay the miners to include my transaction in the block. So when you hear about Bitcoin fees, like transaction fees, that's what it is. So like when the market went absolutely nuts in late 2017 and people were trying to slang Bitcoin around to different exchanges and try to take advantage of price discrepancies or buy on different exchanges, that's when the fees went nuts because the blocks were full and people were paying, $20, $50, whatever, to get their transaction included so that they could go and trade somewhere else. So right now you're going to be paying, prices in the cents, but as someday in the future, it could go nuts again and it may reach those levels again. And one of the things we kind of expect in the Bitcoin space is that some point down the road, it'll generally be so expensive to include a transaction in a Bitcoin block that it'll pretty much be used, as a settlement system between mostly large institutions, or maybe like when you're sending $1 million or a few $100,000, then you're going to be fine with paying the transaction fee. But you definitely won't be using on-chain transactions to buy coffee.
Right.
You'll basically be, you'll have some Bitcoin on balance at some institution, some Bitcoin native financial institution, hopefully, and essentially spending Bitcoin and receiving Bitcoin around on an internal ledger with that institution. That's the intermediary, not unlike what you're doing today with banking. We'll just have a better base currency than, nobody knows how many dollars there are out there. We know exactly how many Bitcoin there are.
Yes, that's something that's appealing.
For a non-Bitcoin podcast, I think that's probably enough. I think we should move on to the next segment. Okay. So let's do some dreaming. Let's do some dreaming.
All right.
We already got a hell yeah from Max Kaiser, who's agreed to do as many little guest appearances as we want, which will be really fun.
I like it.
That's obviously somebody from kind of the alternative finance space. Has been a big Bitcoin booster for a decade now. So that'll be super fun. But, we will certainly have, musicians and comedians and venture capitalists and old friends and new friends and all kinds of interesting people pop in here for, 5 and 10 minute slots in these episodes. I'm curious, some of the people that you think are going to be interesting to have here on Ugly Duckling podcast.
Yeah.
Let's do some brainstorming. Well,
I thought of 2 categories. One, Seattle people that I kind of know, that I think are interesting and that I've run across enough that I feel like I could personally invite them on, or make a just say, hey, I want to talk to you about on the podcast.
Look what I got over there on the chair.
Seattle Supersonics.
There we go.
Represent. Some of those guests are somebody that you actually went to high school with, David Bazan. or
Pedro
David
the
Bazan,
Lion.
who has a band, Pedro the Lion, who he has just reignited, and they put an album out, I think last year or the year before, and he's working on another album. But what's remarkable about Dave is his sense of community. He is a tireless worker. His fans are devoted to him, and he plays constantly. He travels around. He does living room shows. He's always on tour, and he's developed this just incredible relationship with his fans. And I just think it's unique. I know a lot of artists, and he's the only one, or one of the few, that do it at this level of just engagement. And I think that'd be really interesting to talk to him about the way he uses technology, the internet, travel, finance, and he and I have become friendly because he comes into my restaurant a lot. He says we have the best hamburger in town, so he has to come over.
Well, that's just true.
And well, thank you.
Yeah, that's just true. The giddy up, shout out. Thank you.
And so we've gotten into some pretty deep conversations over ice cream and burgers.
Nice.
And I just think he'd be really interesting. So there's him, Dave Bazan. John Broderick is another local Seattle guy who was the lead singer of The Long Winters and the primary songwriter. And he's now a very accomplished podcaster. And he's got like 4 shows that are doing really well. And he is just he's just willing to go into any conversation and blow the doors down. So I think he'd be great. His co-host, Merlin Mann, would also be interesting, by the way. Let's see. Some of the other local people, I was thinking Dave Matthews. He comes into the restaurant as well, and we've become friendly, and we've exchanged numbers, and I feel real, like, he's so famous that I'm kind of like, wait, he actually invited me to coffee? I don't know how to, like, do I just text him up? I don't know.
It's just Dave.
So
bro. It's just
Dave. It's just Dave. He is just he's a wonderful person. From everybody's everybody says so.
Well, I'm not surprised that your first 3 were musicians. Yes,
I know. And I'm trying to think of other people that aren't musicians, but
I often tell people. So my brother was a bit of a local rock star. For a period of, I don't know, half a decade or more in Seattle, playing for 20 years or something in and around the area. So very, very cool. You'll hear some Matty G music as the intro, and then another song in the outro for this show. So that's 17th Chapter, my brother's former band, which still does a reunion show every now and again.
Every now and then we get out there. Yeah.
So let's see. I mean, what's really important to me, I think, is really reaching out to people that I think can be influential and that we can win over to Bitcoin, whether it's on the show, not as much on the show, but maybe in the, the pregame or the after or whatever.
Right.
Just kind of like getting to know some people and helping people sort of come in what they say, the top of the funnel, and getting kind of interested in Bitcoin. And we're doing a pretty good job of that with some pretty big names with our other podcast. Swan Signal, and I'd love to do a little bit more of that here. And I think those are like comedians, big YouTubers, athletes, actors, people with big followings. So I'd love to get people like, like Gary Vaynerchuk. I'd love to get people like Richard Sherman, some like local sports heroes that we like and would have something to talk about. Definitely going to try to reconnect with like Wood Harris from The Wire. Played Avon Barksdale, and get him on to talk some Bitcoin. I think that'd be really fun. Yeah. And just kind of whoever we can get to from that world. Michelle Phan is a big YouTuber with like 10 million followers or subs or whatever, the makeup channel. Love to get her on here. It's just such a different vibe, but she's been very open to Bitcoin and owns some and talks about it now and again. And I think we should be able to get to her through some people down here in LA. So that's kind of, I'm just looking for people that want to engage and have a good chat and mix in a little bit of Bitcoin, a little bit of culture, and then I think we should, I I really want to make this a lot about people who were famous in the 80s and 90s, kind of Gen X icons. So I feel like, that
Pauly Shore.
Sure. Adam Curry. Yeah. Let's get the whole MTV cast.
Do you remember Randy of the Redwoods on
No,
MTV? He was
don't.
a side character, but
yeah, I don't think I remember him.
Yeah.
But,
I know
the cypherpunks, who essentially created Bitcoin, that listserv started in 92 or 93, and Neil Stevenson, who's a Seattleite, wrote Snow Crash, which forecast so much of these things from digital cash to the cypherpunk movement to virtual reality, kind of the way it looks like it's shaping up. That book was written in, I think, 93 as well.
So do I need to read that book?
You need to read Snow Crash or listen to it. Yeah, Snow Crash
okay.
is fantastic.
Okay.
Another book of his is kind of like probably the number one recommended fiction book for Bitcoin, which is called Nomicon, which came out about 8 or 9 years after that. It's a 1,000-pager, but it's a page turner. Snow Crash is not that long. It's probably 300 or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, the way I describe Snow Crash is Ready Player One was basically like the junior varsity cliff notes of Snow Crash.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. But it's basically the same story.
Okay.
But written way earlier. I think that'll be super fun. I think let's wrap and let's do this again on Monday.
Sounds great.
So, Ugly Duckling Podcast, Episode 1, signing off. This party's over.
Peace out.
Bye, bro.
Love you, bro.